Right. Well, welcome to this episode of InfoSec Real. We are absolutely delighted today to be joined by Charity Wright. Charity, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. You're someone that we both admired for a very long time from afar, from the world of cyber threat intelligence. We are very interested in the fascinating world of intel and the deep, dark corners of the internet that you get yourself involved in. But before we go down that rabbit hole, if you don't mind, let me throw it over to you. Just tell us who you are and what you're all about, Charity.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to meet you guys and engage with your audience. My name is Charity Wright. I currently am a cyber threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. So I work with the InfoSec Group research team. And a lot of what I do right now is around geopolitical analysis. We also do a lot of counter disinformation, detecting, analyzing, and reporting on influence operations around the world, as well as like your standard cyber threat intelligence, malware, APT campaigns. And we're just really trying to stay ahead of those threats.
How do you find a disinformation campaign? What does that even look like?
It's still okay. So influence operations, it has been around for, centuries. Militaries have been using it around the world and in the battlefield for a very long time. But the way it's being used now in this digital world, it's such a new frontier for analysts like us. So we're really trying to create frameworks around it and determine what's the best tradecraft, what's the best methodology. Can we create AI to detect false news and detect sentiment, whether it's positive or negative? And right now, it's still a very manual effort, kind of like how cyber threat intelligence was, even 6 to 10 years ago. At first, we started doing it very manually, and then we started creating some automation behind it to help detect those types of threats. So we're still in that process with disinformation as well. So right now we're using some tools that are free, open source tools out there to detect, bots and trolls and to analyze the sentiment and the story, the narrative that's trying to be pushed by whatever actor. But it's pretty interesting. To be honest, it's a stressful field because you have to look at and read a lot of really bizarre things.
I've got a question for you because we're getting into it straight away.
Yeah.
But I've had a couple of conversations with companies who create, I wouldn't say disinformation, but maybe psychological operation type of content. Working in the vendor space and being in threat intelligence, and you don't have to. It depends on how you want to answer this, but would you attribute yourself to a specific political alignment? So, as Recorded Future, so let's say a information campaign was out via the US. Would it be your due care to put that out as threat intelligence, or do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yes. So when I came to work for Recorded Future in August of 2020, I asked a lot of those hard questions too. Like, if I detect a campaign, whether that's a cyber threat campaign or disinformation campaign, and it originates in the United States where we are, or in an allied nation, am I allowed to report on that? Or am I restricted? And of course, the leadership was, hey, we are transparent. We report on intelligence that relates to, organizations all over the world. So the interesting part of 2020 was the election year, and really a lot of organizations, whether they're government or private sector, they wanted to know who's trying to influence this presidential election in the US. And it was really frustrating when we saw very minimal activity. Well, at first, we saw very minimal activity coming from foreign adversaries. And the majority of the false content was actually coming from Americans. So it really was more of a domestic issue than it was a foreign issue at the beginning. And it's frustrating when people want to hear that it's just a foreign campaign, that foreigners like Russia or China are trying to interfere with our election. But the truth is, there are internal parties that wanted to sway it as well.
That's amazing. That's so fascinating, isn't it, when you think of the kind of shit that goes on?
Yeah, as an American, it was kind of sad and frustrating to get into those extremist forums and really see a very dark side of domestic extremism in America that most of us are not exposed to. Even on my own Facebook account, I would be sharing some of this intel with family and friends, trying to say, hey, that's actually not true, and here's the truth behind it, and here's some of the research we're doing. People don't want to hear the truth. Sometimes they just want to hear what they believe. And so that's, kind of what I think that's a big factor that makes disinformation analysis very different from our traditional intelligence analysis. Usually it's very clear who the customer is. It's clear what they want to know. They don't try to hide the information. They just take it and go, okay, here, we need to make some decisions based on this. But in America during this election cycle, it was a lot different. The audience that we're trying to convince, like, hey, this is actually false, they didn't want to hear it.
and these disinformation campaigns, then, it would be through regular kind of social media, Facebook, Twitter, that kind of stuff. You would see the output of this kind of fake news. Is that right?
Yeah, it started in more underground forums, like fringe platforms. They had established some new websites like the Donald.win, and they started using Gab and Parler and MeWe, just alternative platforms. That's kind of where it started, in the underground. And there were some dark websites and deep websites too. And then we saw it go mainstream when certain politicians started picking up that narrative, and it became very clear that they had a goal in mind. Their story, their narrative became very clear. And as we saw, more politicians and famous people sharing this information, we started seeing like how it was split left and right, and who was supporting what types of information.
So these would be private organizations that would be. So we're not saying when we're talking about like Russia, China, all the rest of it, we're talking about state-sponsored stuff, activity. But when you're talking domestic, to influence a U.S. government campaign, it can't be the U.S. government doing that. Am I right? Is it? So it's other entities. What kind of entities are we talking about?
So one of the interesting things is, like, let's say President Trump, for example, former President Trump, he represents not only himself and his family, but he also represents the United States and the Republican Party. So it's hard to differentiate because he started sharing a particular narrative. For example, stop the steal, or Biden stole the election, or the Democrats stole the election. That was the narrative. And he claims to be representing his own opinion. But in the meantime, he was not taking responsibility for the role that he plays and how many people and organizations he was representing as well. So when we were identifying who is responsible for this, it really came down to individuals, and then groups of individuals as they started identifying with that particular narrative. but we can't say it was the US government or, it definitely was not a particular branch of the military or anything like that. On the contrary, those organizations were very open to hearing what disinformation was being spread. So I think the government as a whole was going, okay, what do we need to know? Who's spreading the false news? And how will that affect this election? How do we protect this election from that false information? Whereas a lot of the false information was coming from, figureheads in the party, figureheads in certain social media platforms.
I guess
Like the executive of Gab, he also was, one of those that encouraged that information.
I guess after Cambridge Analytica, no one needs to hide anymore about these activities. Everyone knows it happens. So instead of doing it in the dark, you might as well just do it openly on Twitter. You might as well just put these things out now, because everyone's clued up. But why do you think? And this is globally. Why do you think we, as the public, you've been in the military some time, but why do you think civilians really struggle with the truth when it comes to cyber news or cyber related types of activities? Why do you think that is?
That's a really good question. I think it's just overwhelming. I think we're just inundated with information every day because of how digital our world is. And I think it's just, to go a psychological perspective, I think it's a way of coping. I think a lot of people don't want to deal with conspiracies and figuring out what's true. One of our biggest frustrations is trying to verify information and bust myths, because there's always some kind of contradicting information out there. So I think the general population, they don't want to deal with it. It's just a lot to handle. When you're talking about, the QAnon conspiracies and the idea of there being like a ruling elite class that are like horrible people, that's scary to think about. And I think people generally like to avoid thinking about such dark topics.
I think you're right, and it goes back. I think what you said before really resonated. That people really like to hear what they want to believe, right? Like what that kind of preconception in their head. If someone says it, they kind of believe it because it validates the kind of crazy thought that maybe they had 6 months ago. So and it's so hard to to get them away from that. Once it's out there in the public domain. Fascinating world, this. It really is. Your background is actually, you mentioned it, you touched on it there, that you have a military background as well, and you have a specialism in Chinese linguistics as well.
Yes.
Can you give us some background there? Where did that come from? What's the deal?
I know, it's bizarre.
It's impressive. It's not bizarre. It's impressive.
Well, I joined the Army when I was 22. I was in my third year of college here in North Texas, and I just decided, you know what, I want to see the world. I want a change of pace and learn some new things. So I joined the Army to be a linguist, not knowing what language I would be assigned to. It was 2005. So I was assuming I'll learn Arabic and go to Iraq. Like, that was, in my head, that was the plan. But the Army had other plans for me, and they assigned me to learn Mandarin Chinese. So I attended the Defense Language Institute for a year and a half to learn Mandarin. And it's really an amazing program, one of the best language schools in the world. And it's for U.S. military and government contractors. But we went from knowing absolutely no Chinese to, at least a college level, being able to talk about and understand economics and politics and, public relation or, international relations. It
So
was
you
really
didn't know
challenging.
no Mandarin, no experience prior to that?
Mm-mm.
Serious?
I could barely learn Spanish in high school.
Amazing. So a year and a half and you're fluent in Mandarin.
It was pretty
That's amazing.
proficient. Yeah. I think fluency kind of built up over the years of actually working on the job. But when I graduated from Chinese, I was assigned to work at the National Security Agency. So that was a surprise to me. I was stationed in Hawaii. So that was very different from what I imagined, but I was really, really happy and I felt very, blessed to have that opportunity. So up to that point, I had no idea why I was learning Chinese. I was thinking State Department or interpreting. I didn't know. So when they put me at the NSA, it was really eye opening. And I mean, I know NSA is known as a spy agency, but really the motto is that we monitor everybody, like foreign adversaries. So it was a great experience to be able to analyze foreign intelligence and do live real-time translation from Chinese to English. And I think that's where your fluency kind of builds up on the job as you work that particular mission. And you learn the vocabulary and the culture specific to that particular mission.
Why didn't they tell you what you were going to be doing then when you were learning the language? Is that, but why not dangle a carrot so you learn it faster or something? I don't know. I'd want to
Right?
know. I couldn't.
I would have spent many more nights in study hall, right? It's to protect us from being collected on by counterintelligence.
Wow.
So at the Defense Language Institute in California, we received several briefings about Chinese counterintelligence and Russian counterintelligence working as undercover delivery drivers or cab drivers or whatever, trying to build connections with us and collect on what we do know about our job. Now, there are some people at the language school that have gone to work a mission and then return to learn a different language. Like I was in Chinese class with some soldiers that had already been working as Korean linguists on the DMZ in Korea. So they knew the, kind of top secret type of work that they were going to be doing with that language. But those that were new, we did not know. So it was just, I think it's for our own good, for our own security. And I'm really glad because I actually have an interesting story about a cab driver in particular that frequented. I cannot say that word.
Frequented.
Yes, frequented our base and built relationships with us. He was an old Chinese man, like older than my grandpa, and he ended up being discovered as a counterintelligence agent. So it was like he was trying to collect on us, get to know us. He knew so much about our families, where we lived back home, just a lot about our lives in general that we never really thought was harmful information or could be used against us. But I'm glad, in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't know the top secret level of information that I'd be exposed to.
I guess now looking back, you think that's quite obvious.
Yeah.
you
yes.
think that's a little bit suspicious, but it's crazy stuff. I love having these conversations because it's almost the sensationalizing of the spy movies, but it's all real. My question was, do you think you've ever been honeypotted? And I guess you kind of.
Yeah. And since then, there have been more online incidents that I can recall. A lot of very suspicious LinkedIn job offers for working for, mysterious named companies in mainland China, offers to fly me there and pay for all of my travel. At first, I was talking to them to kind of see what they wanted. And then I had received so many of those messages, I just decided I'm going to take my Chinese name off of my LinkedIn profile, and maybe that will limit how much I'm targeted. And it helped a little. But it was very intense for a few years when I was still in the Army.
Well, I mean, this is crazy, but how does it make you feel then, knowing that there was counterintelligence operatives assigned, their mission was to elicit information from you and from your colleagues? How does that make you feel? Is it a game because you're in the same kind of game as them, or is it actually a bit more personal than that?
When they target you, it feels personal. And I know it's not always personal. Like there's a lot of Chinese linguists out there, a lot of people that have worked for the agencies and have since left government work. But it feels pretty personal, especially after the OPM hack, the Office of Personnel Management in the US. That's where all of our security clearance paperwork is stored. And when it was revealed that China had breached that information and stolen that information, that's when I started to become worried. Because then you're talking about my family, my home, my friends, my roommates. Like they know everyone that I've been connected with for the past 10, 15 years. But it was also at that point that I just decided I can worry about this for the rest of my life and let it stress me out, or I can just accept the fact that China has a lot of information on me and they might come snooping a little bit further, you know? And that's why I've gone public talking about my job. And I mean, China already knows. So what am I hiding?
Yeah, exactly.
I
And
think
with
talking
Equifax,
skills, but you know.
yeah. And then with Equifax as well, it's just, there's only one thing left. They know everything.
What did they want it for, though? It sounds like, I feel like that's probably the most stupid question I could ask you. But like, is it so that they can try and turn you into some kind of double agent, or is it so that they can actually put pressure on you for some reason by using your personal connections and influences and stuff? What is it they would do if you accepted one of those crazy job offers? What would happen next, do you think?
Oh, they would probably offer me money to steal secrets and hand them classified information.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what they typically do. But honestly, if you zoom out and look at their big picture, nothing is off limits for China. They really believe in unrestricted warfare, which I think I have the book right here. This book has been very insightful. It's actually written by two leaders in the People's Liberation Army. And this book really outlines all the different ways that they use asymmetric warfare to conquer their objectives. And it means that nothing is off the table. So when you consider that, and you zoom out and look at their capabilities for collecting data, not only in their own country. I mean, it's, the amount of cameras and data collection, they have access to everything in their networks there, but also they're doing this big data collection all around the world now too. I think when you piece it together, it creates a puzzle and you start to be able to determine human behavior based on culture and language and human behavior in general. And when you have that type of information, it's very valuable for AI and machine learning. And it just powers technology even further. If you can figure out what people, how they think, how they behave, how they act, and then you can sell them products based on that behavior, it, grows your economy. It's just like a trickle down effect. They're very wise. They're very China has long-term objectives, 50 years out, and they have a one-party system, and everything in that system is working towards achieving those objectives. So that is one advantage they have over Western societies that tend to be politically, torn apart. So it's interesting to see what they can do with all of this data that they're collecting, either through, let's say supply chain breaches, cyber espionage, or even counterintelligence agents on the ground.
It's crazy to think how powerful they are as a nation. If you really like, you're in the weeds, and you must think, gosh, there is nowhere to hide. There's no corner. And I've had this conversation before about privacy, where we think a lot of people definitely I'm pro privacy and X, Y, and Z, but realistically, when you think about it, there is no privacy on the internet. And if you're happy with that, which I am, then cool, it's fine. I still use WhatsApp. Like, I know everyone jumped off WhatsApp onto Signal, but realistically, like, you're just making your life more difficult. Like, like I still, if Mark Zuckerberg wants my information, that's cool. Like, I'm happy with that. I have nothing really to hide, unless I'm doing illicit information, or I'm doing activities on the web which I want to hide, or in real life I want to hide. Do you think China's use of cyber, I was going to say security, but their use of cyber warfare is just one tool in their long-term plan, or are they heavily invested now into technology and they're going that direction?
Yeah, I think it's one of their most valuable tools. But, something interesting that we've observed over the years is that they aren't as creative in creating their own cyber weapons. They tend to steal other people's cyber weapons, repurpose them, and it's still effective. So, they're kind of like, why reinvent the wheel? But I think cyber warfare definitely is, I think, one of the most serious threats coming from China. But we also have to consider, I call it cyber colonialism, like how they're building internet infrastructure in other countries, and they have sole control over that. They have, backdoors into everything, and they have ultimate control over monitoring internet traffic in other countries, not just their own. So that's kind of like Big Brother,
But
all over the world.
Don't you think we're already there though? But because the Equation Group have the exact same, Juniper backdoors, Cisco backdoors, like it's already there. So I know China are doing it, but why do we? I know, and some people do talk about the other nations who do observe the exact same type of tactics. But why is it more interesting if Russia and China are doing it, or than if the UK or the GCHQ are doing it? If GCHQ do it, it's okay, don't worry about that. But if China are doing it, it's on the FT. It's everywhere else. Why do you think?
Yeah, you're right. I don't have answers to it. We can't choose where we're born, or we can choose where our loyalties lie. That's for sure. The thing is, there are some nation states like Russia and China and North Korea who are known for human rights violations and abusing their power. Not saying that America and its allies don't ever experience that, but in general, we have better control over corruption in certain ways. And we are accountable to, international organizations like the UN, to limit human rights abuses. Meanwhile, China is using this great power that they have to persecute minorities, and basically they're conducting genocide against the, Uyghur Muslim community. And, in the news just last week or a couple of weeks ago is, Russia is constantly chasing down anyone who speaks against them, and they're always trying to silence dissenters. So I think there is a huge difference in how this power is used and who should be allowed to use it in those ways. But it's a crazy world we live in, It
is. I'm sorry, we got really dark there, didn't we? We got really, really into the ethics of it all.
But it is like a cyber arms race. You're right. It is. It's like like a Cold War, a competition to like always get ahead, and oh, they have that capability, well, we need that capability. And what if they use this as a weapon against us? We need to be able to defend against it. So it's just escalating and escalating. And right now we're in this place where we're going, okay, where's the line between, like, when does a cyber attack become actual warfare? You know what I mean? So I think that's where we are in
I think we I think we as a community thought WannaCry was that line of, well, we've had other large mass cyber attacks, but WannaCry was, especially for the UK, hit the NHS, and people's lives were at stake, and that was you've crossed the line. And since then there hasn't really been any movement, and we've had many attacks since then, and many big incidents. In terms of lines, do you think, well, we're already there at a splintered internet? You've got Asia Pac Chinese internet, you've got the Russian internet, and then you've got everywhere else. So do you see that getting worse? So you mentioned earlier about China building infrastructure in. I know this from personally, I've seen this in Caribbean countries where they've built roads and infrastructure and then put internet connectivity in there. Do you see a place where there is the Chinese internet, but it's not in China, it's everywhere else?
Absolutely.
Also?
Yes. So China has been investing heavily into other countries, especially, in certain areas in Africa. They've built a base in Djibouti. They're building out a lot of internet infrastructure, and that's not to count like supply chain. So like getting their technology and backdoors into, Western supply chains too. But yeah, I actually did a presentation maybe last year on this topic of the balkanization of the internet, and how with Russia implementing their RuNet, what are the objectives there? Like, are they trying to protect themselves from a worldwide internet shutoff? Or are they trying to prepare to kind of segregate themselves like China has with the Great Firewall? And does that mean that everyone is going to start becoming very nationalistic with their internet infrastructure? Like, is everyone going to start going, okay, we won't accept foreign investment or this foreign computer chip, or, you know what I mean? Like, just trying to protect their own infrastructure. I think it does look like it's going that direction,
100%.
but
I think it's definitely going that direction.
I see it in the UK. Like,
oh yeah,
with the I work in the telecommunications space, and there's some legislation that's coming into force pretty soon, which is effectively going to tell internet service providers you cannot use these companies in your organization. You can only use X percentage. And I get it. Like, there are certain, but all of a sudden, independent businesses are at the mercy of whatever the government tells us to do. And all of a sudden, we can't use this product that's best for our customers. We've got to use something else. It's the start of that road, I think. Fascinating.
And I think the SolarWinds / FireEye / US government, I think this big incident was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of executives in corporations. I think they're going, oh my gosh, okay, we've been hearing about third-party risk and supply chain risk, but this is a mass-scale campaign. And from what we understand, it's cyber espionage right now. But the danger is that they have a foothold in those networks and could easily weaponize that foothold and create some kind of destructive attack or shut down, which would cause great economic damage on their victims. So I think it's been a wake-up call. A lot of leadership are coming to the vendors going, okay, what can you tell me about not only this attack, but how have supply chain attacks evolved over the past 10 years? And where do you see it going? How can we get ahead of it? That's where CTI comes in.
I personally, and this is my opinion, I don't think in a realistic form, I don't think you could ever get ahead of it, because you always have to implement some level of trust with a provider. As much as you can do, as much as due diligence, as much as due care as you want, but that does not stop that third-party provider being compromised, either through digital space or through human compromise.
Fucking SolarWinds 123, mate. That's what it's all
Yeah,
about,
yeah, exactly. Or someone scattering USBs in the car park, or someone saying, "I'll give you $500,000 to go and plug this into the network." Like, those things will still happen, because unfortunately humans are flawed machines, and we will accept money for anything.
Well, that's an interesting conversation. Ashley, what's your price, Ashley? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, for recorded future one. So
yeah, you're right. It's, I can see you're a realist, and you've heard the slogan, like, it's not if you get breached, it's when you get breached. And I think the goal really is just to reduce the risk as much as possible, because we're never going to be able to do like 0% risk. So it's all about, balancing productivity and giving people freedom to actually work, within these limitations, but also securing them the best that we can.
So from your privileged perspective on cyber intelligence, because you work in a vendor who gathers cyber intelligence for commercial purposes, how can a business look at their vendors and feel some sort of comfort? Is there key bits of information they should be looking at, or should they be asking, have you got what's your NIST maturity and X, Y, and Z, or is there something else they should be doing?
Like when you're selecting vendors,
or existing vendors,
I think it's really important. Well, first of all, I think there's responsibility on both sides. The vendor has a responsibility to the customer to disclose how you're securing your organization and that data. On the vendor side, we have some of the, biggest companies in the world and government organizations as well, and their standards are very high. So when they inspect our security protocol and setup, sometimes we have to make adjustments to become more secure, to make that customer comfortable with the level of risk of doing business with us. So two sides. I think the vendor needs to be transparent and honest with that, of course, under an NDA, just to make sure there's nothing being exposed too much. But they have a responsibility to be transparent with their customers about, here's how we're securing your data. If you are Bank of America or Ernst & Young and you're giving me an entire list of your digital assets to monitor, that's a very sensitive set of data. And so I have the responsibility to say, okay, here's what we do to protect this. Is this up to your standards? But on the opposite side, when you're interviewing vendors and you're exploring working with them, pay attention to your gut, pay attention to what they're telling you and what they're not telling you. Definitely go in there with an open mind, ready to ask a lot of questions. And don't be afraid to be demanding. It's the security of your entire organization. And it really only takes 1 week third party or 1 week connection with that supply chain.
It's totally true. I've seen it so many times where it turns into a messy situation. I just want to take you back slightly to, you were talking about the work that you did in the US military, and it sounded fascinating. Why did you leave? What was the decision point to go into the private sector, and what did that transition look like?
I'm glad you asked. So as a woman in the military, I decided to start a family. So when I got pregnant, I decided, I'm going to stay in. I'm working at NSA. It's an office job. It's fine. But Army hours are still very long, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. sometimes. And I just found it really hard to balance my work life in the Army with having a newborn baby. And then I had a second child right after the first. Like, my kids are 10 months apart.
Wow.
So that was
the bounce.
not part of the plan, but I'm very blessed to have them now. So as a working mother, I decided I'm going to get out of the Army, at least active duty, and finish college while I get the kids, at least off to school. So when they were old enough to start going to school full time is when I returned to the workforce. And when I made that decision, I ended up back here in Texas near my family. And I decided to join the Texas Army National Guard as a Chinese linguist, which is a part-time. It's like a reserve obligation. And the Texas Army National Guard, we do a lot of stuff here in Texas to support, natural disasters or protests or whatever. So I really wanted to continue my Army career and kind of pick up where I left off. But I found that once I moved home, I joined the Guard part-time. I got into cybersecurity full-time in the private sector. It was just a much more fulfilling mission working in the private sector and discovering all the really cool intel that we can do with open sources. It was mind-blowing. Like coming from a secure facility, a SCIF, and working with classified information all the time, you just assume that none of this is unclass. And then you go to the private sector and you read, an APT report, like the APT-1 report blew my mind. I looked at the guy and said, how is this unclassified? Like, the buildings, their names, and he said, hey, you can find it all through open sources. And I was like, I'm in. I want to be part of this. Also, the money is better in the private sector. So
you should have just led with that, because that's not. You could have just said, "Yeah, just don't want."
There's the soundbite right there. There's the soundbite.
Yeah.
It's so true, why is it so annoying, isn't it? Because, and especially in the UK, I mean, I don't know what the percentage ratios are like between, public and private sector salaries. In the UK, having friends and colleagues who I know are in UK government, it's so bad. And they work in London, the most expensive place on the planet. And you think, what? It's unreal. They earn, I think I earn 3-4 times as much as they do. It's crazy.
Yeah. And, in the government sector, it's a little more stable. It's harder to get fired. You move up a little slower. So things are a little more stable and calm. Private sector, I found, especially in cyber threat intelligence, everything is changing. Every day it's something new. It's a new attack. It's a new campaign. It's a new discovery. And also when you work for a vendor, you're not only producing the intelligence, but you're selling it and you're promoting it and you're building your brand too. So that's a whole other area of excitement. I love it personally. But when I have friends that are getting out of the military, I try to pull them into private sector, but a lot of them like the stability and the comfort and safety of a government role. And I can't blame them. So it just different personalities, Yeah.
I get it.
There is a lot of US veterans though, or veterans in general, not just US, but having, when I previously worked at B of A, a lot of the cyber threat team, a lot of the cybersecurity team in the US were ex-military, and I feel like there's that safety net in the private sector where where one goes, others will follow as well, right? And it's people speak the same kind of language, they have the same kind of background and experiences, and it's just a bit of, like you said, kind of safety, I guess. It's nice.
That's what pulled me into private sector. I actually never considered cyber because I was never an IT person and I'm not great at math and science. So I assumed cyber is not my thing. But when I found out the need for intelligence collection on these types of threats, I was really intrigued. And I found a company here in Dallas where everyone I interviewed with was former military. And so it felt like family. And working with a former commander of US Cyber Command, we called him Colonel. It was just a very familiar atmosphere, and it was a great way for me personally to transition from military to private sector. I felt like family, things were comfortable. We had morning briefings. It was just a very familiar atmosphere. So that helped me. And now I try to do the same thing to let my friends know, hey, there are options out here and you can make a lot more money doing it out here.
One question I have for you is, I did a conversation last week with a company out of Israel, and both founders are ex IDF. How come in America or in the UK, anywhere else, bar Israel, how come the ex-service people in countries outside of Israel don't go and create companies, but in Israel, most people out of unit, I can't remember the number, 8200, they go on to either head up companies or create cybersecurity companies. Why do you think that?
Well, I think they've established this really amazing like tech bubble, and they're so supportive of each other, like family. I worked at Insights for a year and a half, and they are based in Tel Aviv. And it was an amazing experience. I got to spend 3 weeks in Israel, getting to know the team, training with them, learning how they do things. And it felt very familiar. Like it felt like we have same analysis processes. So it was kind of like a brotherhood, a partnership. But Israel has this amazing culture where they're so supportive of each other. And it's just a very tight community over there. They have a lot of meetups. They know each other's families. And so they always try to support and lift each other up and promote their friends and family in the industry. But also Unit 8200, they specialize in cyber operations. So you have these very young people. And by the way, military service is compulsory in Israel. So that's the majority of the population is going through this kind of path, this program. And some of them choose to naturally go into the private sector doing what they did in the military. And then they learn even more on the outside, just like we do in every other country. You leave the military and you get a broader view of the world and about cyber threats all over. It's not a narrow mission of like, okay, we're going after Hamas in the Gaza Strip, or you're on Iran or whatever. It's a more broad view of like international cyber threats.
Do you think it's challenging for people who don't have a military background to break into cyber threat intelligence?
Yeah. I've heard some feedback from academics and think tankers and people that didn't come from military. I've heard that like sometimes they feel a little marginalized, or like they didn't know if they could do cyber threat intel because they don't have intelligence background. But I always encourage them to just go for it anyway, because in the intelligence community, we need people with all different types of mindsets and knowledge and background. Like we are teams of complex human beings solving complex problems. And so we need people with legal backgrounds and compliance and IT and networking. People can be very successful in CTI no matter where they come from. I think it really just takes a drive and a desire to want to learn it and to always be like hungry for more. But yeah, I think sometimes they have expressed like that they feel a little left out, but I try to let them know, like at Recorded Future, InfoSec Group is like a mix of IT backgrounds, military, intelligence agencies, think tanks, and college graduates. So it really gives us like a well-rounded, just kind of the ability to solve problems in ways that I haven't seen before in other companies.
How do you think, so if Charity had this is how you get into cyber threat intelligence top 10 or top 5, like how would you, outside of the military background, how would you do that? Like participate in like trace lab types of activities, or is there any, what do you think?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love trace labs, by the way. Shout out to Adrian Korn. He's a friend of mine. Oh. So Yeah, when I first got into cyber, I had no cyber background, and I felt really out of it. Like, I was just like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I told my bosses, like, I'm going to be real with you. I don't know anything about cyber, but I'm going to learn as fast as I can. And some of the ways that I did that was like diving into classes, certifications, volunteering with groups like Trace Labs and National Child Protection Task Force, and just like trying to expand my open source intelligence capabilities through opportunities outside of work too. But also, like, consider all of the resources that you have in your company. There are people sitting next to you that have a plethora of knowledge and understanding about these things that you may not understand. If you can get an hour on their calendar every couple of weeks, just say, hey, I would really appreciate if you could teach me what cryptography is. Or, there's a section in the Security Plus certification I don't understand. Can you teach me this? I think using what you have available around you is really important to learn cyber.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And I should throw in reading as many CTI reports as you can. Like, dig into whatever vendor reports you can get your hands on, attend webinars. And that's not just a plug because I write reports and do webinars, but I say that because you learn from reading. And as a CTI analyst, one of the most important things we do is we have to write reports. And the way to learn that style of reporting is by reading those reports. So, oh, my light just went out. I used to be very vendor agnostic, and I will still say that, like, as peers in the industry, we respect each other's work, and we're always like seeking to understand what everybody else is doing. What is their methodology? What is their tradecraft? How are they, finding these campaigns? So dig in and just, read as much as you can. That's my best advice.
You got to look at like the FireEye report on SolarWinds, and it was insane. It's just for a different level for me.
Oh gosh, that's what I was thinking. You saying read reports? Like, some of these reports are heavy. Like, they're heavy lifting. Yeah, I read that fire, and I've read the CrowdStrike enumeration report. I just think those are on different levels. So
I'll tell you what. Do you know what? We were sharing books before. I tell you what I had printed the other day. This is hilarious. Actually, you'll probably love this. It's the U.S. versus Park Jin-hyuk.
Oh, nice.
It's all here. This is my bedtime reading at the moment.
Wow. Is that an indictment, or is it like a transcript?
Yeah, it's just the indictment. So I think there was an updated indictment recently, actually, but let me get the cover of it.
Yeah, those indictments are so insightful. Yep. Oh yes, I read Chinese indictments all the time, and that's where, like, if you have a peer that has a legal background, they can be very helpful with things like that, helping to understand, like, why they use certain terminologies in indictments, and like, what good is it to, put sanctions on a country or to indict an individual. So yeah, that looks like nice nighttime reading.
I know. Did you pay for that to be professionally?
I did, yeah. To be fair.
Do you guys want to see what I have here for reading? I am so excited. I just ordered a bunch of books on Amazon, and these are all about narrative warfare. So let me show you. Dr. Ajit Maan, she is a PhD, and she teaches all about narrative warfare. So I bought a bunch of her books because I attended one of her webinars. Escaping the Rabbit Hole is all about how to debunk conspiracy theories using facts, logic, and respect. And then more of Dr. Maan's books. Narrative warfare is kind of like the starting one, and dangerous narratives and political influence operations.
Wow.
So I think I'm set on reading material for a while.
I find it, I do like the fact that you've got a book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and you were up to 3:30 last night in the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I'd love to know how to escape the rabbit hole, because I got into a editing Adobe Premiere rabbit hole the other day, and you just get, I think it is a industry, like a cybersecurity thing. We spoke to Jack Sider about this, and that's what he does. He gets into these long rabbit holes and then pops his head up and realizes 2 days have passed, or or it's 3 a.m. and you've you where you are.
Yes.
One thing I wanted
That's how it felt. That's how it felt when we were analyzing disinformation around the election. We spent so much time in these underground forums and trying to identify if somebody was like saying like where they're going to meet or what they're going to, what kind of weapons they're bringing. Like we needed solid intel to hand off to law enforcement to be able to protect, Americans and try to deter what happened on what was January 6th? Was that the name?
I think so.
I can't remember.
Feels right.
The insurrection. So it was like we were deep in the rabbit hole. Like we were really deep in there. We were using alternate personas and posing as them. And it's hard when you can't identify with an ideology, like an extremist ideology, but you have to pretend anyway just to like gather intel. It's pretty rough. So
in the private sector though, I've always found it quite interesting. Like, even stupid things like buying stolen credentials on the criminal underground forum. It's as basic as they could get, I guess. Up to having conversations with people about weapons and all the rest of it. Like, as a private entity, though, how do you, if law enforcement came along and busted open the log files and were like, "Hey, I want to speak to this Charity Wright person because they're in the thick of it," and like, well, how do you say, well, how did they know that what a company like Recorded Future is doing is legal? I guess that it looks legal, but
well, I've never been caught. I don't know what that would be like because I follow best practices and just try to protect myself and my team as much as possible. But yeah, if that happened, we would have a very transparent conversation. And honestly, a lot of law enforcement are our customers. So they don't know what false personas we're using on those forums, but we're usually not the ones selling malware, selling ransomware as a service. Like we're not the ones doing that. We're the ones like purchasing on behalf of our customers,
Well, that's the incident with the 2 Coalfire pen testers who were prosecuted for breaking into a bank. So I think it's
that was rough.
Yeah, and you look at it thinking, why did they even go ahead? Like who's is there someone not looking at this thinking the penetration testers? Let's just put this to bed.
Especially if you're physically trying to penetrate a building and there's security measures, you got to make sure everybody knows what's going on. Everybody was briefed. Yeah, that's crazy.
I wanted to ask you about an article you posted a few years ago about anxiety in cybersecurity. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's something that we've touched on a few times. Do these recordings about imposter syndrome, and cybersecurity anxiety, and I just wanted to ask you, why in the bottom of the article you talked about you feel like this is the only technology industry where you feel this exists, where there's a massive anxiety about being in the industry itself. Why do you think that is?
Man, this industry can be kind of brutal. It's like every day there's something different and we're trying to figure it out as we go. And I think that's, there's a level of uncertainty that kind of drives that anxiety. And people deal with it differently. Some people dive right in and want to solve all the problems and they overwork themselves. And then others will, kind of dissociate and like push it away and try to ignore it. And I don't know if there's like, a good way. I think self-care is really important, but I think that also a major factor is that we're so understaffed. Like, we don't have enough people to do the jobs that we have. And that's every single organization that I've worked at. Actually, Ernst and Young, we were well staffed, but the industry in general, it's pretty hard to find qualified people. And so we're all just, we're overworked, and we're dealing with a lot of stress, trying to figure out new threats that we've never seen before. And it can be pretty rough.
Yeah, you mentioned something about trying to figure out, and something that I've personally experienced is when you have the moniker of the cybersecurity expert or the CTI expert, people always want you to have the answer, and sometimes you don't have the answer, and you almost don't want to say, "I have no idea." Like, I just don't. So you stress about not having the answer all the time, and I can
Yeah.
imagine in CTI, it's, well, your job is to have the answer. Why don't you know the answer?
Yeah. I think it's perfectly okay for people to admit, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. And that's something we learned in the military. When you go in front of a board for an interview or promotion, they don't want you to lie. They don't want you to falsify or make up fluffy information. They just want you to be honest and say, I don't know, but I'll definitely look that up and figure it out. They want to know that you can be transparent and honest. I mean, we're human. We can't know everything.
So
But it is a lot of pressure.
I agree. This is a pressure pot of an industry. And I know from my experience, limited experience within the industry, and certainly in the financial institution space, that it is a pressure cooker. But I wouldn't change it, because that experience of being in that pressured environment accelerated my own personal learning journey like there is no tomorrow. Like, I learned
Yeah.
things. I worked with people. Someone I really respect said to me whilst I was working at BFA, said, "You are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with." And that's stuck with me ever since he said
Wow.
that. And it's so true, because when I was there, the people were just amazing. And you think,
Yeah.
shit, I'm bringing their average down. And I need to learn, and I need to develop, and I need to, like, better myself. And this is organic process of this continuous improvement that everyone, a rising tide floats all boats, as they say. You kind of better yourself, and others will follow you. It's an inspiring industry to be in.
Yes, I definitely experienced that as well. When I came to Recorded Future, well, I should preface it by saying, normally when I come into a CTI team, I'm usually the only Chinese linguist. But when I came to Recorded Future, I found out that there's an entire team of Chinese linguists. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, what do you need me for? But it's amazing, because iron sharpens iron. And it's so nice to have a team that you can bounce ideas off of, or to peer review your work, or double check your translations, or whatever. So I realized, wow, I am so lucky to be part of this phenomenal team. Sometimes I still struggle with imposter syndrome, or, I'm not as technical as I'd like to be. But I find that I get to learn from the more technical team members, and we all grow from that, and you don't have to be good at everything. Everyone has their unique gifts and specialties. And I found out really early on that the technical aspects were not my strength, but I'm better at geopolitical analysis and strategic intelligence. And I do have something to offer the industry, despite not being super technical.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I love that phrase, iron sharpens iron. I'm definitely stealing, trademarking, copyrighting that one.
I think it may have come from the Bible or some philosopher. I don't know.
Okay. You have a very rich relationship with the industry. U.S. military background, a very varied employment base, rather. EY, Insights, the Army National Guard, etc. And obviously Recorded Future. What's next for charity then? What is on the horizon in your career landscape, do you think? Now that you've delved into the world of cybersecurity, is there something else that you've seen that you really want to dig into, or is it are you just in your kind of utopia right
now? Maybe both, because I'm always like looking forward. I'm one of those people, I have to train myself to be present in the moment, because I'm always like, I want to grow. I have goals to meet. I discovered last year that I really have found my sweet spot of what I love and what I'm good at. And a lot of that is, presenting and teaching and educating people. I'm one of the most extroverted people in the industry, which is rare. You don't meet very many extroverts in CTI. So I'm trying to just enjoy that role and constantly challenge myself to grow and report on, like, geopolitical issues is really what I'm digging into a lot. But my objectives right now, like looking forward, this stack of books is a big part of what I'm going to be doing this year. Is really, like, we're Recorded Future and InfoSec Group, we're already doing a ton of detection, analysis, and reporting on disinformation and influence ops. And most people don't know that, because our reports are mostly for customers internally. So my goal is really to, like, tell the world and show the world what we're doing. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I think one of my kids just walked in the door. And show the world how we're doing it and why. Like, there's a whole set of threats out there. It's manipulating information and manipulating people, how they think and the way they behave. And this is not necessarily a cyber threat, but it is a threat that is happening in the cyber world that we need to be aware of. And so my goal is really to help our team create this methodology and a framework around analyzing disinformation, so that we can kind of evangelize and teach that to other organizations as well. Because it's not just affecting voters and governments, it's also affecting companies, because disinformation as a service is being sold in the dark web too. And the goal of that is to wreck a company's reputation. So that, that plays a big role in risk management. So that personally, that's something that I'm tackling right now. And that's an area where I can grow and help the industry mature.
That's cool. I could go on and on. I every time you say something, I have another question, and it just make it a 4-hour podcast, and no one wants to listen to that. But
to be continued, right?
There's lots. I think there's so much we could delve into.
I agree. I think I really admire your personality within the industry. Like you said before, there's not many extroverts, certainly from the CTI space, and it's nice to see someone that is so articulate and so capable in this space come forward, do shows like this, put out products like you do. And I really enjoyed, certainly recently, the webinars that I attended of yours as well. And I absolutely recommend people follow you and look out for your work.
You're making me blush. No, thank you. I appreciate that so much, because, we just work the hardest we can, and you don't often get feedback. So thank you. I appreciate that.
That's good. Thank you for your time today, Charity.